Most people think justice fails when bad people take power. That's the version we're usually taught. A corrupt politician, a ruthless criminal, a greedy businessman, someone abuses authority and justice collapses. But Appaloosa explores a far more uncomfortable reality. Sometimes justice doesn't fail because power is in the wrong hands. Sometimes it fails because power changes hands at all. Because every new person who gains influence brings their own desires, loyalties, fears, and ambitions. The rules remain the same on paper, but the people enforcing them change, and suddenly what was once called justice starts looking a lot like personal preference. Set in the lawless American West, Appaloosa begins as a story about two bringing order to a violent town, but by the time it ends, it has become something much deeper. It's a story about how fragile justice really is when it's constantly forced to compete with power. The town of Appaloosa is the kind of place where laws technically exist but carry very little weight. The real authority belongs to Randall, a wealthy rancher whose influence reaches into every corner of the community. Isn't powerful because he's officially in charge. He's powerful because everyone understands the consequences of opposing him. Men work for him, fear him, depend on him, or benefit from him. In a place like Appaloosa, that kind of influence is stronger than any badge. The movie wastes little time establishing this reality. When murders a lawman and faces almost no meaningful consequences, the town realizes what it already suspected. Justice exists only when someone powerful chooses to respect it. Without enforcement, laws become words. Without courage, institutions become decorations. The citizens know they need help, so they hire two men with a reputation for bringing order to places where order has disappeared. Those men are Virgil Cole and Everett Hitch. From the moment they arrive, the film creates a fascinating contrast. Virgil is the leader, confident and decisive, while Everett serves as his closest friend and partner. Their relationship is built on trust earned through years of surviving dangerous situations together. Unlike many westerns that focus entirely on revenge, Appaloosa places this friendship at the center of the story. Before any political struggles emerge, before any romantic complications appear, the foundation of the film is the bond between two men who understand exactly how the world works. Virgil and Everett don't bring complicated philosophies to Appaloosa. They bring rules, clear rules, simple rules. If someone commits murder, they're punished. If someone threatens public order, they're confronted. Their version of justice isn't elegant, but it is consistent, and consistency is exactly what the town has been missing. As they begin establishing authority, resistance naturally follows, isn't accustomed to being challenged. For years, his influence has functioned as the town's real government. Now two outsiders are threatening that arrangement. The conflict that emerges isn't merely a battle between criminals. It's a struggle between two different sources of power. Believes power comes from wealth, fear, and influence. Virgil believes power comes from legitimacy and enforcement. Initially, the town seems to benefit from this shift. Criminal behavior becomes riskier, citizens feel safer, the law finally has teeth. It appears that justice is winning. But Appaloosa is far too intelligent to stop there. Because the movie isn't interested in showing how justice is established, it's interested in showing how difficult it is to preserve. The arrival of French begins changing the dynamics that have governed the story. Unlike the straightforward conflict with introduces uncertainty. She enters the town searching for stability and opportunity, but her presence gradually reshapes the relationships around her. Virgil, who has always seemed focused and disciplined, becomes increasingly drawn to her. Everett notices the changes immediately. What makes these developments so important is that they reveal how power rarely remains fixed. People often imagine authority as something formal, a badge, a title, a position. Appaloosa argues that influence takes many forms, possesses no official authority, yet her presence begins altering decisions, priorities, and loyalties. The balance that once existed between Virgil and Everett slowly shifts. As Virgil becomes emotionally invested, his judgment becomes more complicated. The same man who once viewed situations through the lens of law and order now has personal considerations influencing his choices. The transformation isn't dramatic or sudden. That's what makes it believable. Most compromises don't arrive as obvious betrayals. They arrive disguised as reasonable exceptions. Meanwhile, continues searching for opportunities to reclaim control. Although he has lost some of his influence, he understands something crucial. Systems built around individuals are vulnerable because individuals are vulnerable. Every weakness, every desire, every emotional attachment creates an opening. The film's tension increasingly comes from these overlapping struggles. On one level, there's still the conflict between the law and criminal influence. On another, there's the evolving relationship between Virgil, Everett, and, as these storylines intersect, Appaloosa begins asking a difficult question. Can justice remain objective once personal interests become involved? For much of the movie, Everett serves as the audience's anchor. He watches events unfold with growing concern. He understands how quickly order can unravel when people stop following principles and start following emotions. Unlike Virgil, who becomes increasingly invested in his personal future, Everett remains focused on the larger picture. He recognizes that maintaining justice requires consistency, especially when consistency becomes inconvenient. The deeper the story progresses, the more apparent it becomes that the town's problems were never limited to Randall. Removing one powerful figure doesn't eliminate the underlying issue. It merely creates space for new power structures to emerge. That's where the movie's central idea becomes incredibly compelling. Justice isn't threatened only by corruption. It's threatened by human nature. Every person who gains influence eventually faces the temptation to use it for personal reasons. Sometimes those reasons are selfish. Sometimes they're understandable. Sometimes they're even noble. But the result is often the same. The line between principle and preference begins to blur. By the time the story approaches its final act, the conflict is no longer about whether deserves punishment. The audience already knows the answer to that question. Instead, the focus shifts toward whether the people responsible for enforcing justice can remain faithful to it when their own interests are involved. The decisions made near the end of the film carry weight because they're messy. There are no perfect outcomes, no triumphant speeches, no clean victories. Characters make choices based on competing obligations, personal loyalties, and practical realities. Justice becomes less about achieving an ideal result and more about navigating an imperfect world. This is where Appaloosa separates itself from more conventional westerns. Many stories treat justice as a destination. The heroes defeat the villains, order is restored, and balance returns. Appaloosa suggests that justice is actually a process requiring constant maintenance. It isn't something you achieve once and keep forever. It's something that must be defended repeatedly against new pressures, new interests, and new forms of power. When the dust finally settles, the movie leaves viewers with a lingering sense of unease. Not because evil has won, but because the struggle itself never truly ends. One powerful man may be removed. Another influential figure may emerge. Relationships change, circumstances change, priorities change. The challenge of preserving justice remains. That's why the angle of this movie feels so relevant beyond its Western setting. Justice fails when power changes hands isn't really about cowboys, ranchers, or frontier towns. It's about a pattern that repeats throughout history. People often believe replacing the person in charge will solve systemic problems. A corrupt leader is removed. A new leader arrives. A powerful group loses influence. Another gains it. Yet the underlying challenges frequently remain because the issue was never simply who possessed power. The issue was how power influences human behavior. Appaloosa understands that authority doesn't magically transform people into guardians of fairness. Every individual carries biases, attachments, fears, and ambitions. Those things don't disappear when someone receives a badge, a title, or public trust. If anything, power often magnifies them. The movie also offers a surprisingly realistic perspective on institutions. Laws matter, systems matter, enforcement matters, but none of them operate independently from the people responsible for carrying them out. A law can be written perfectly and still be applied inconsistently. A system can be designed fairly and still be influenced by personal interests. Justice depends not only on rules but on the character of those enforcing them. In the end, Appaloosa isn't telling us that justice is impossible. It's telling us that justice is fragile. It survives only when people choose principles over convenience, consistency over emotion, and responsibility over personal gain. The moment those priorities shift, power starts reshaping the system around itself. And that's the lesson hidden beneath every gunfight, every political maneuver, and every personal betrayal in the film. Justice doesn't automatically win when power changes hands. Sometimes that's exactly when the real danger begins. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to Beyond the Scene because the best movies aren't just entertainment. They're lessons hiding in plain sight.